At the Henderson family reunion in Millbrook, my uncle Garrett raised his beer and announced loud enough for everyone to hear, "Look at little Cassandra still playing dress-up in her costume. When are you getting a real job?" The entire backyard fell silent. 50 relatives staring as I stood there in my Air Force dress blues, the same uniform I'd worn to briefings in the Pentagon just days before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Laughter rippled through the crowd like a poison wave. My cousin Trevor snorted into his drink. Aunt Patricia covered her mouth, pretending to hide a giggle but failing miserably. Even my own mother, standing by the potato salad, just shook her head with that familiar look of disappointment I'd grown up seeing whenever I mentioned my military career. "Playing soldier," my grandmother Evelyn chimed in from her lawn chair, waving her hand dismissively. "At your age, sweetheart, shouldn't you be thinking about settling down, getting married, having babies like normal girls do?" The cake, a generic grocery store sheet cake with "Welcome Home" scribbled in blue frosting, sat behind me on the picnic table, looking as half-hearted as their invitation had been. My chest tightened as I watched my teenage niece Brooke roll her eyes and whisper something to her friend about Aunt Cassie's make-believe military thing. I stood there, in that backyard in Millbrook, surrounded by people who shared my DNA but had never once asked about my service, holding a plastic cup of warm lemonade while they turned my homecoming into a public humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the last 15 years defending their freedom to mock the very uniform that had taken me from a small-town nobody to briefing rooms where decisions affecting national security were made. So I smiled, raised my plastic cup, and said clear and proud, "Don't worry, Uncle Garrett. Next time I'll make sure to wear civilian clothes when I visit. Wouldn't want my costume to embarrass anyone." My name is Cassandra Mitchell, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Because have you ever realized in the middle of a celebration that your entire life's work was seen as a joke by the people who were supposed to love you? They didn't come to my commissioning ceremony. They didn't show up when I received my Bronze Star. But they came to this reunion for the free food and the chance to remind me that, in their eyes, I was still the awkward teenager from Millbrook who didn't know her place. I watched Uncle Garrett's expression shift from smug amusement to confusion as I kept smiling. My father, Robert, opened his mouth, probably to deliver another lecture about how I was wasting my life in the military instead of finding a husband, but I was already walking away. Away from the picnic table, away from the relatives who had spent years treating my service like an extended phase I'd grow out of, away from people who saw my uniform as a costume and my dedication as delusion. The humid August air felt more welcoming than that backyard ever had. My younger brother Dylan was leaning against his truck in the driveway, shaking his head. "You okay, Cass?" he asked, stepping forward. He was the only one who'd ever asked about my deployments, the only one who seemed to understand that what I did mattered. "No," I said, pulling off my service cap and running my fingers through my regulation-length auburn hair. "But I will be." Because in that moment, something fundamental shifted inside me. Not breakage, liberation. I was done trying to earn respect from people who had already decided I was worthless. Done explaining why serving my country was a calling, not a career placeholder. Done pretending their approval mattered when I had the respect of generals and the gratitude of a nation. They wanted me to be ashamed of my dress-up. They could live without knowing the truth about what this uniform really represented. Let them think Colonel Cassandra Mitchell was just their delusional niece playing soldier. Let them believe that my 15 years of service, my 3 deployments, my security clearance, and my position in the Joint Chiefs of Staff was all just an elaborate game of make-believe. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask about in all these years, was that their little Cassie had become someone they couldn't even imagine. Someone whose phone calls were answered by Pentagon officials. Someone whose recommendations influenced policy. Someone who had earned the right to wear these eagles on her collar through blood, sweat, and more sacrifice than any of them would ever understand. The next family event was going to be interesting. Grandfather William's 80th birthday was coming up in 3 months, and they'd probably expect me to show up in jeans and a t-shirt, properly humbled and ready to apologize for my phase. But what came next would make them regret ever calling my uniform a costume. Because sometimes the universe has a sense of irony, and sometimes small-town families who mock their decorated military relatives get exactly the wake-up call they deserve. As Dylan and I drove away from that reunion, leaving behind the sound of their laughter and the taste of their dismissal, I had no idea that in just 3 months, their perspective on my dress-up would change forever. I had no idea that Grandfather William's birthday would become the day they realized they'd been mocking not just a soldier, but one of the highest-ranking women in the United States Air Force. The invitation to his party was already sitting on my kitchen counter back in Arlington, and this time, I wouldn't be coming alone. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The drive back to Arlington was silent for the first hour. Dylan kept glancing at me through the rearview mirror as I sat in the passenger seat, still in my dress blues, staring out at the Virginia countryside rolling past. Finally, he broke the silence. "You know what pisses me off the most?" he said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "They have no idea who you really are." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Maybe that's for the best. "No, Cass, it's not." He pulled over at a rest stop and turned to face me. "You want to know what I see when I look at you in that uniform? I see someone who's briefed senators, someone who's made decisions that kept us safe, someone who's earned every single ribbon on that chest." I looked down at my ribbons. Bronze Star, Meritorious Service Medal, Air Force Commendation Medal, Joint Service Achievement Medal, each one representing months or years of dedication, sacrifice, sleepless nights, and moments of pure courage that my family would never understand. "They see costume jewelry," I said quietly. "Then they're blind." "But you know what? That's their loss, not yours." As we pulled back onto I-95, my phone buzzed. General Patricia Wells, my commanding officer at the Pentagon. I answered immediately. "Colonel Mitchell." "Cassandra, I hope you're enjoying your leave. I hate to interrupt, but we need you back tomorrow for the Thornfield briefing. The Secretary of Defense specifically requested your input on the Middle East assessment." I straightened in my seat. The Thornfield briefing was classified at the highest levels, a strategic review that would shape military policy for the next decade. "Of course, ma'am. I'll be there at 0800. "Perfect. And Cassandra, excellent work on the Jordan situation last month. Your intelligence analysis potentially saved lives." After she hung up, Dylan was staring at me. "The Secretary of Defense?" "It's not a big deal," I said, automatically, the way I always downplayed my role when talking to family. "Not a big deal?" Dylan pulled into a gas station and parked. "Cass, do you hear yourself? You just got called in to brief the Secretary of Defense, and you're acting like it's nothing." He was right. I had spent so many years having my achievements minimized by my family that I'd started doing it to myself. When Uncle Garrett called my uniform a costume, part of me had actually felt shame instead of pride. When Grandmother Evelyn suggested I get a real job, I'd questioned whether 15 years of military service counted as a career. "You know what the real tragedy is?" I said, unbuttoning my dress blue jacket. "I actually let them make me feel small for a minute back there." Dylan pumped gas while I sat there processing what had just happened. My phone buzzed again, this time a text from my colleague, Lieutenant Colonel James Park. "Saw the news about your promotion recommendation. Pentagon sources say you're on the short list for Brigadier General.
Congratulations. Brigadier General. 1 star. At 37, I would be one of the youngest female generals in the Air Force history. And my family thought I was playing dress up. The irony was almost funny. While they were at home in Millbrook gossiping about my phase and wondering when I'd settle down like a proper woman, I was being considered for a rank that would put me in the highest echelons of military leadership. While they saw failure, the Pentagon saw potential. "Dylan," I said as he got back in the car, "what do you know about Grandfather William's 80th birthday party?" "It's going to be huge. Mom's planning some big celebration at the Riverside Community Center." "Why? Who's invited?"
Everyone. The whole extended family, his old army buddies, town officials, probably half of Millbrook. Mom wants to make it special since she thinks it might be his last big birthday. Dylan looked at me suspiciously. "What are you thinking?" I smiled for the first time since leaving the reunion. "I'm thinking Grandfather William deserves a proper celebration, and I'm thinking it's time my family learned exactly what this costume represents. Cass. Don't worry, little brother. I'm not planning anything cruel. I'm just planning to show up as myself for once. No downplaying, no hiding, no letting them make me feel ashamed of what I've accomplished." As we drove through the gathering dusk toward my apartment in Arlington, I felt something shifting inside me. The hurt from this afternoon was transforming into something else. Determination. For 15 years, I'd been Colonel Mitchell to my colleagues and little Cassie playing soldier to my family. It was time those two worlds collided. "One question," Dylan said as we pulled into my apartment complex. "What exactly does your security clearance allow you to do?" I grinned. More than they could possibly imagine. Because what my family didn't know, what they'd never bothered to ask about, was that their little Cassie had access to resources they couldn't fathom, and Grandfather William's 80th birthday was going to be more memorable than anyone expected. The invitation was waiting on my kitchen counter when I got inside. "You are cordially invited to celebrate William Henderson's 80th birthday, August 15th, Riverside Community Center, Millbrook." I RSVP'd yes immediately. After all, it wasn't every day a grandfather turned 80, and it wasn't every day a family got to see what happens when you stop underestimating the quiet one in uniform. This time, I wouldn't be showing up alone, and I definitely wouldn't be apologizing for who I'd become. The next morning, I sat in the Pentagon briefing room, facing the Secretary of Defense, 3 Joint Chiefs, and a handful of senators. The mahogany table stretched between us like a battlefield, covered with classified documents that would reshape military strategy across 3 continents. As I presented my analysis on Middle Eastern insurgency patterns, I couldn't help but think about Uncle Garrett's words echoing in my mind. Playing dress up. If only he could see me now, I thought, as Senator Rebecca Martinez nodded approvingly at my recommendations for troop deployments that would affect thousands of lives. If only Grandmother Evelyn could witness me fielding questions from the Secretary about intelligence operations that I'd personally coordinated from a bunker in Qatar. Secretary Harrison said, leaning forward, "Colonel Mitchell, your assessment of the situation in the Kandahar province has been invaluable. How do you recommend we proceed with the extraction timeline?" I clicked to the next slide, my voice steady despite thinking about how my family saw this moment. Me in my costume, playing make-believe with toy soldiers. Based on our intelligence networks and the seasonal patterns of insurgency activity, I recommend a phased withdrawal beginning in October, sir. The window for safe extraction narrows significantly after November due to weather and increased hostile activity. After the briefing, General Wells walked with me toward the parking structure. "Outstanding work in there, Cassandra." The secretary was impressed. "I think this solidifies the promotion recommendation." "Thank you, ma'am." She paused at her car. "You seem distracted today. Everything all right?" I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best policy with Patricia Wells. She'd been my mentor for 3 years, and her own journey as a female officer had been even more challenging than mine. Family reunion yesterday. Sometimes I forget that not everyone understands what we do here. General Wells smiled knowingly. "Ah, the when are you getting married and having babies conversation. More like the when are you getting a real job conversation."
She laughed, but not unkindly. I remember my brother once asking me when I was going to stop playing Army and become a teacher like Mom wanted. This was right after I had returned from my second deployment in Afghanistan, where I'd spent 8 months coordinating supply drops that kept entire forward operating bases from being overrun. What did you tell him? Nothing at the time, but 5 years later, when I was promoted to Brigadier General, he suddenly became very interested in understanding what I actually did for a living. She opened her car door. Sometimes people need to see the uniform in context before they understand what it represents. Driving home that evening, I found myself thinking about the timeline of my family's dismissal. It hadn't always been this way. When I first enlisted at 18, there had been a brief moment of pride. Grandfather William had served in Korea, and he'd seemed genuinely moved when I told him about boot camp. But somewhere along the way, as years passed and I didn't follow the traditional path they expected, their pride had curdled into patronizing tolerance. The turning point had been my first deployment to Iraq in 2010. I was 24, a newly minted first lieutenant, and scared out of my mind but determined to serve. Had called home from Balad Air Base, trying to share what I was experiencing, the weight of responsibility, the brotherhood of service. But all they heard was danger and waste. "Why are you throwing your life away over there?" my mother had asked. "Come home, Cassie. Find a nice man and settle down." They never asked about the convoy I'd helped coordinate that delivered medical supplies to villages cut off by insurgent activity. They never wanted to hear about the intelligence reports I'd analyzed that helped prevent attacks on civilian targets. When I came home after that first deployment, they treated me like I was recovering from an illness rather than returning from service to my country. By my second deployment to Afghanistan in 2014, they had stopped asking about my experiences altogether. When I tried to tell them about the Afghan women I'd worked with, interpreters and cultural advisors who risked their lives to help American forces understand local dynamics, my Aunt Patricia had actually yawned and changed the subject to my cousin Trevor's new job at the insurance company. The pattern had continued for years. Each promotion was met with polite disinterest. Each commendation was glossed over. When I received the Bronze Star for my actions during a complex rescue operation in Syria, my mother's response had been, "That's nice, dear. Did you see that Trevor got engaged?" But what hurt most wasn't their indifference to my achievements. It was their active dismissal of my choices. At every family gathering, there were the comments, "Still in the military, huh? When are you going to settle down? This is all fine for now, but what about your future?" As if my future wasn't happening in real time, as if my career wasn't already surpassing anything anyone in our family had ever accomplished. The truth was, I'd been protecting them from the reality of what I did. When they asked about my work, I gave sanitized answers. Intelligence analysis instead of counterterrorism operations. Strategic planning instead of life-or-death mission coordination. I'd made my service sound like a desk job because I thought it would be easier for them to understand. What a mistake that had been. They had no idea that their little Cassie had been personally commended by the president for her role in a classified operation that had prevented a major terrorist attack on American soil. They didn't know that foreign intelligence services knew my name, that my security clearance was so high that even discussing my work in general terms could be considered a breach of national security. They saw a woman in her late 30s, with no husband, no children, wearing what they considered a Halloween costume to family events. They had no context for understanding that the costume represented 15 years of expertise that had made me one of the most trusted intelligence officers in the United States military. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone rang. "Dylan. Hey, Cass. I've been thinking about yesterday." "Yeah?" "You looked me up online. Your name came up in a Washington Post article about military intelligence reforms. They called you one of the Air Force's most promising young officers." I smiled despite myself. "Dylan, you shouldn't—" "No, listen. The article mentioned that you've been deployed multiple times, that you've received several major commendations, and that you're being considered for general officer rank. It talked about operations you've been involved in that I can't even pronounce. That's all public information, I said carefully. Cass, they have no idea, do they? Mom, Dad, Uncle Garrett, they literally have no clue who you really are. No, I admitted, they don't. Jesus, it's like they've been mocking a Medal of Honor recipient for wearing their medal. Not quite that extreme, but his point was valid. For 15 years, my family had been dismissing someone they fundamentally didn't understand. And I'd been complicit in that dismissal by never correcting their assumptions. Grandfather William's birthday is in 3 months, I said. Yeah, Mom's going all out. She wants to make it special. Good, because I think it's time they learned exactly who they've been calling a failure. As I pulled into my apartment complex, my phone rang. Dylan. Hey, Cass, I've been thinking about yesterday. Yeah? I looked you up online. Your name came up in a Washington Post article about military intelligence reforms. They called you one of the Air Force's most promising young officers. I smiled despite myself. Dylan, you shouldn't... No, listen. The article mentioned that you've been deployed multiple times, that you've received several major commendations, and that you're being considered for general officer rank. It talked about operations you've been involved in that I can't even pronounce. That's all public information, I said carefully. Cass, they have no idea, do they? Mom, Dad, Uncle Garrett, they literally have no clue who you really are. No, I admitted, they don't. Jesus! It's like they've been mocking a Medal of Honor recipient for wearing their medal. Not quite that extreme, but his point was valid. For 15 years, my family had been dismissing someone they fundamentally didn't understand. And I'd been complicit in that dismissal by never correcting their assumptions. 3 weeks after the reunion, I made a decision that would change everything. I was sitting in my Arlington apartment, reviewing classified briefings for an upcoming NATO summit, when my phone rang. Mom. Cassie, honey, I hope you're not still upset about the reunion. You know how Uncle Garrett gets when he's been drinking? He didn't mean anything by it.
I paused my reading of intelligence reports that would influence international military policy and listened to my mother make excuses for a man who had publicly humiliated me in front of 50 relatives. He called my career dress-up, Mom. Well, you have to admit, sweetheart, you do look awfully young in that uniform. People might think you're playing soldier. Something crystallized in that moment. The same woman who had raised me was now suggesting that my appearance in the uniform I'd earned through blood, sweat, and 15 years of dedication was somehow fraudulent. That I looked like I was playing at something I'd devoted my entire adult life to mastering. Mom, I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force. I know, dear, but no. My voice was calm, but final. There is no but. I outrank 98% of the military. I brief senators and generals. I make decisions that affect national security. And you're worried that I look too young? Silence. Then, Cassie, you don't need to get defensive. We're proud of you, but when was the last time you asked me about my work? Really asked, not just polite conversation. Another pause. Well, you know we don't understand all that military stuff. Have you ever tried to understand it? It's not really a woman's job, is it? I mean, fighting and all that. Wouldn't you be happier teaching or nursing or... I hung up. For the first time in my adult life, I hung up on my mother mid-sentence. The phone rang again immediately. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again, voicemail. On the third call, I answered. Cassie, don't hang up on me. That was very rude. What was rude? I said, my voice steady. Was implying that my career is inappropriate for a woman. What was rude was suggesting that 15 years of military service isn't a real job.
What was rude was allowing Uncle Garrett to mock me in front of the entire family without saying a word in my defense. We don't want to hurt your feelings. Then stop hurting them. I took a deep breath. Mom, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to really hear me. I am not your little girl playing dress-up. I am a field-grade officer in the United States military. I have a top-secret security clearance. I've served in 3 combat zones. I've been personally commended by the Secretary of Defense. This is not a phase. This is not a hobby. This is my life, my calling, and my career. But what about marriage, children, a family? This is my family. I gestured to the framed photos on my desk. My unit in Afghanistan, the team I'd worked with in Syria, fellow officers who had become closer than siblings. These people who trust me with their lives, who depend on my expertise, who respect what I do, they're my family. That's not the same thing, Cassie. You're right. It's better. Because they chose to love me based on who I am, not who they want me to be. I could hear her sharp intake of breath. That's a terrible thing to say. It's an honest thing to say. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of my real life. Commendation letters from generals, photos from overseas deployments, military textbooks and classified briefings, security badges from the Pentagon, CIA, and NSA, the Bronze Star in its case on my mantelpiece. None of this existed in my family's version of my story. In their narrative, I was still 18-year-old Cassie from Millbrook, who had joined the military because she couldn't figure out what else to do with her life. They had frozen me in time as a confused teenager, refusing to acknowledge the woman I'd become. That evening, I made a series of phone calls that would set everything in motion. First, I called Lieutenant Colonel James Park. James, I need a favor. Grandfather's 80th birthday is coming up, and I want to do something special, something that shows respect for his military service. What did you have in mind? A proper military honor, flyover, honor guard, maybe coordinate with the local VFW. He served in Korea. He deserves recognition. I can make some calls. Where and when? Millbrook, Virginia, August 15th, Riverside Community Center. Consider it done. Anything else? I hesitated, then committed fully. Actually, yes. I think it's time my family understood what military service in the 21st century really looks like. Would you be interested in attending? You and maybe some of the other officers from our unit.
James laughed. Are you planning to shock some civilians, Colonel? I'm planning to educate them. My second call was to General Wells. Ma'am, I know this is unusual, but I'd like to request permission to invite some family members to observe a Pentagon briefing. Educational purposes. That's highly irregular, Cassandra. I understand. But my grandfather is turning 80. He's a Korean War veteran, and I think seeing what modern military service looks like would mean a lot to him. Your grandfather only? I smiled. Well, if my parents and a few other relatives happened to be visiting him that week, and if they were all properly vetted and cleared for an unclassified briefing, I see where this is going. You want to show them what you actually do for a living. Something like that. General Wells was quiet for a moment. You know what? I like it. It's about time more civilians understood what their military does. Send me the names and I'll see what I can arrange. My third call was to Dylan. I need you to do something for me, and I need you to not ask questions. I'm listening. I want you to casually mention to Mom that it might be nice if the whole family could visit Grandfather William the week of his birthday. Maybe make it a real celebration. Suggest that they all come up to the D.C. area for a few days. Cass, what are you planning? Education, I said. Just education. That sounds ominous. Dylan, they think I play dress-up for a living. They think my career is a teenage phase that's lasted 15 years. They have no concept of what I actually do or who I've become. It's time they learned. And you're going to teach them? I'm going to show them. After I hung up, I sat in my living room looking at the invitation to Grandfather William's 80th birthday party. 3 months away. 3 months to coordinate what would either be the most educational experience of my family's lives or the most humbling. I wasn't angry anymore. I was determined. For 15 years, I had allowed them to minimize my service because I didn't want to make them uncomfortable. I had translated my accomplishments in terms they could understand, which meant stripping away everything that made them significant. No more. If they wanted to see who Colonel Cassandra Mitchell really was, they were going to get the full picture. And if that made them uncomfortable, well, maybe discomfort was exactly what they needed. I opened my laptop and began typing an email to the event coordinator at Riverside Community Center. Grandfather William's 80th birthday was going to be bigger than anyone imagined. Much bigger. Because when you spend 15 years calling someone's uniform a costume, you don't get to control how they prove you wrong. The silence from my family was immediate and deafening. For the first time in 15 years, my phone wasn't buzzing with their casual demands disguised as concern. No calls asking when I was coming home for random weekends, no guilt trips about missing cousin Trevor's baby shower, no passive-aggressive comments about my lifestyle choices. It was liberating in a way I hadn't expected. Instead of dreading family calls, I threw myself into my actual work with renewed focus. The NATO summit preparations were intensive, requiring coordination between 12 different intelligence agencies across 8 countries. As I sat in secure conference rooms discussing counterterrorism strategies with officials from Britain, Germany, and France, I realized how absurd it was that people who respected my judgment on matters of international security were the same rank and position that my family dismissed as playing dress-up. 3 days after my conversation with Mom, Dylan called. Cass, Mom's been calling me nonstop. She wants to know why you won't answer her calls. Because we have nothing to discuss until she's ready to treat me with basic respect. She thinks you're being dramatic. I was reviewing satellite intelligence from the Middle East while we talked, cross-referencing insurgent movement patterns with weather data that could affect upcoming operations. Dylan, let me ask you something. If your boss at the engineering firm publicly humiliated you at a company party, called your work playing with toys, and then expected you to just get over it, what would you do? I'd probably quit. I can't quit being their daughter, but I can quit accepting their disrespect. Dylan was quiet for a moment. Mom said she didn't realize you were so sensitive about your job. Sensitive? I almost laughed. Dylan, sensitive is getting upset when someone doesn't like your haircut. This is about 15 years of systematic dismissal of everything I've worked for. I know, I'm on your side here, but maybe you could just call her back. She's really upset.
She's upset because for the first time in my adult life, I'm not accepting her judgment of my choices. That's not sensitivity. That's self-respect. After hanging up with Dylan, I found myself thinking about the patterns I'd accepted for so long. Every family gathering had followed the same script. I would show up, they would make comments about my career being temporary, I would deflect and change the subject, and everyone would pretend we were a normal, supportive family. But what was normal about a family that couldn't celebrate their daughter receiving a Bronze Star? What was supportive about parents who treated military commendations like participation trophies? My phone buzzed with a text from Aunt Patricia. Your mother is worried sick. Call her. I stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I made plans that had nothing to do with my family's expectations. Lieutenant Colonel James Park had invited me to a barbecue at his house in Alexandria, where several officers from our unit would be gathering with their families. Cassandra! James's wife, Sarah, greeted me at the door. So glad you could make it. James has been talking about your intelligence assessments nonstop. He says you have the sharpest analytical mind in the Pentagon. In the backyard, I found myself surrounded by people who understood my world. Major Rebecca Torres was discussing her recent deployment to Jordan, where she'd coordinated humanitarian aid drops. Captain Michael Chen was describing his work with cybersecurity protocols that protected military communications networks. Colonel David Hayes was talking about his upcoming assignment to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Cassandra, Colonel Hayes said when he saw me, I heard through the grapevine that you're being considered for Brigadier General. That's incredible. Thank you, sir. Nothing's confirmed yet.
Well, when it happens, you'll be one of the youngest female generals in Air Force history. Your family must be incredibly proud. I took a sip of my beer and looked around at these people who saw my accomplishments as exactly what they were: earned recognition for excellence and dedication. Actually, they think I'm going through a phase. The conversation stopped. Major Torres looked confused. A phase? They call my uniform a costume. They think military service isn't appropriate for women. They're waiting for me to settle down and get a real job. Are you kidding me? You brief senators. You've been to more classified briefings than most generals. They don't know any of that, I admitted, and honestly, until recently, I didn't think they needed to know. Colonel Hayes leaned forward. Cassandra, may I ask you something? Why do you protect them from understanding what you do? It was a question I'd been avoiding, but surrounded by colleagues who respected my work, I felt safe enough to answer honestly. Because for 15 years, I've been trying to be the daughter they wanted while also being the officer I needed to be. I thought if I kept my military life separate from my family life, I could make both work. And how's that strategy working out? Sarah asked gently. It's not. They think I'm a failure because they have no context for understanding success. Major Torres nodded. My parents were the same way until they attended my promotion ceremony. They saw me being recognized by generals, saw the respect I'd earned, and suddenly everything clicked. Maybe your family needs to see your world, Captain Chen suggested. Not hear about it secondhand, but actually see it. As the evening progressed, I found myself relaxing in a way I rarely did around my biological family. These people asked about my work with genuine interest. They understood the weight of classified responsibilities. They respected the sacrifices military service required. When James walked me to my car at the end of the night, he said, "You know, Cassandra, you seem different tonight. More yourself." I feel different. I finally stopped apologizing for who I am. About time. You're one of the most accomplished officers I know. Anyone who can't see that isn't looking very hard. Driving home through the Virginia suburbs, I thought about the contrast between my two worlds. In one, I was respected, valued, and understood. In the other, I was pitied, dismissed, and misunderstood. For years, I'd accepted that dichotomy as normal. But it wasn't normal. It was toxic. My phone had 17 missed calls when I got home. All from family members. Mom had called 8 times, Aunt Patricia 4 times, even my father had called twice, something that hadn't happened in months. I listened to one voicemail from my mother. "Cassie, honey, please call me back. I don't understand why you're so upset. We love you, sweetheart. We just want what's best for you. Please don't shut us out like this." The message revealed everything wrong with our dynamic. She genuinely believed that dismissing my career was wanting what's best for me. She couldn't understand why I was upset because she couldn't see her own behavior clearly.
I made myself a cup of tea and sat on my balcony overlooking the Potomac River. In the distance, I could see the Pentagon, where tomorrow I would brief a room full of people on intelligence that could affect international relations. I could see the Capitol building, where senators waited for my assessments before making policy decisions. This was my real life. This was who I had become. And for the first time in 15 years, I wasn't going to apologize for it. My phone buzzed again. A text from Dylan. "Mom wants to know if you're coming to Grandfather William's birthday party." I typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Because I was going to that party. But I wasn't going alone, and I wasn't going quietly. It was time my family met Colonel Cassandra Mitchell, not the version of me they'd created in their minds, but the woman I actually was. The woman who'd spent 15 years earning respect they'd never bothered to give. 2 months before Grandfather William's birthday, I received clearance for something unprecedented. General Wells had approved a limited family tour of the Pentagon, specifically designed to showcase what modern military intelligence operations actually looked like. But as I prepared the security clearance paperwork for my relatives, I realized I needed to document exactly what they'd missed over the past 15 years.
I spent that weekend in my home office pulling together what I privately called the evidence. Not for revenge, but for context. If my family was going to understand who I really was, they needed to see the complete picture of what they dismissed as dress-up. The first folder contained my deployment records, 3 combat zones: Iraq, 2010 to 2011, Forward Operating Base Balad, where I'd spent 13 months coordinating intelligence operations that resulted in the successful disruption of 17 separate insurgent networks. Afghanistan, 2014 to 2015, Bagram Airfield, where my analysis of Taliban communication patterns had led to the prevention of 3 major attacks on civilian targets, saving an estimated 200 lives. Syria, 2018, the classified operation that had earned me the Bronze Star. I couldn't include details, but the commendation letter spoke for itself. Colonel Mitchell's exceptional leadership and tactical expertise under enemy fire resulted in the successful extraction of 12 civilians from hostile territory and the gathering of intelligence critical to ongoing counterterrorism operations. While my family had been at home assuming I was pushing papers at some administrative desk, I had been making life-or-death decisions in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. The second folder contained my commendations and efficiency reports, 15 years of exceeds expectations and promote immediately ratings, comments from superiors that painted a picture my family had never bothered to see. Officer of exceptional analytical capability, demonstrates leadership qualities rarely seen at this rank, critical asset to national security operations. The Air Force Achievement Medal for developing new intelligence protocols, the Joint Service Commendation Medal for interagency cooperation during the 2019 embassy crisis, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal for exceptional contributions to strategic planning that enhanced national security. Each medal, each ribbon, each certificate represented months or years of expertise that my family had reduced to playing soldier. The third folder was the most telling. My security clearance documentation. Top secret, sensitive, compartmented information, special access programs, nuclear personnel reliability program certification. The Pentagon entrusted me with secrets that could affect global stability, while my own family couldn't trust that I knew what I was doing with my life. But the fourth folder was what really drove home the magnitude of their misunderstanding. Press clippings and official publications where my work had been referenced or credited. A Washington Post article about military intelligence reforms that quoted me extensively. A Department of Defense publication crediting my research on insurgent financing with fundamentally changing how the military approaches counterterrorism funding interdiction. An academic paper I'd co-authored for the Naval War College that had become required reading for intelligence officers. A classified brief I had written that had been distributed to NATO allies and credited with improving international intelligence sharing protocols. While they'd been wondering when I would get a real job, I had been shaping policy that affected international military operations. My phone rang as I was organizing the documentation. Lieutenant Colonel Park. Cassandra, I've got updates on the birthday arrangements. The flyover is confirmed, 2 F-16s from Andrews Air Force Base, the Honor Guard team from Quantico is available, and the local VFW is coordinating with us for the ceremony. That's fantastic, James. What about the reception logistics? Well, that's where it gets interesting. When I called the Riverside Community Center to coordinate timing, they mentioned that this is apparently going to be a much bigger event than originally planned. Your mother has been following local officials, trying to get the mayor involved, talking about media coverage for your grandfather's military service. I paused in my filing. Media coverage? Seems like someone suggested that a Korean War veteran turning 80 might be a good human interest story. There's talk of the local news station covering it.
My brother. He's been pushing the family to make this a bigger celebration. I think he's laying groundwork for what's going to happen when they realize who they've been calling a failure. James laughed. This is going to be quite the education for them, isn't it? More than they can imagine. After hanging up, I called Dylan. What did you do? no idea what you're talking about. The mayor? News coverage? What happened to a simple family party? Well, Dylan said, and I could hear the grin in his voice, I may have mentioned to Mom that Grandfather William's military service deserves recognition, and I may have suggested that having some official presence would honor his sacrifice, and I may have implied that you had connections that could make something special happen. Dylan, Cass, you wanted them to understand who you are. Well, now they're going to see it in front of the whole town. The mayor's going to be there. The newspaper is sending a photographer. Mom's beside herself trying to figure out how her daughter arranged a military flyover. She doesn't know it was me? Oh, she knows. She's been calling everyone trying to figure out how little Cassie managed to coordinate something like this. Aunt Patricia spent an hour on the phone with me yesterday trying to understand how military flyovers work. Dad's been researching F-16s on the internet. For the first time in months, I laughed. Really laughed. They're researching F-16s? Dad called me yesterday to ask if you knew any pilots personally. I told him you might know a few people in the Air Force. A few people? Cass, they're starting to realize they might have underestimated you. Mom found that Washington Post article I mentioned. She's been reading about intelligence reforms and trying to figure out if the Colonel Mitchell they quoted is really you. What did you tell her? I told her she should ask you herself, but since she's been too proud to call you back, she's been trying to research her own daughter online like she's investigating a stranger. The irony was perfect. My mother, who had spent 15 years dismissing my career without bothering to understand it, was now frantically Googling me to figure out what I actually did for a living. There was something else, Dylan continued. Grandfather William has been asking questions too. He wants to know about your deployments, your rank, what your ribbons mean. I think seeing the flyover announcement made him realize he never really understood your service. What kind of questions? Military questions. He pulled out his old Korean War photos and started asking me if I thought you'd seen combat like he did. He wanted to know if your medals were for valor or just for time served. I looked at the Bronze Star sitting on my desk. For exceptional heroism under enemy fire. What did you tell him? I told him he should ask his granddaughter directly, since she's the actual expert on military service in the family. And he said he'd like that very much. He said he's been proud of you, but never knew how proud he should be. After hanging up with Dylan, I sat in my office, surrounded by evidence that my family had never bothered to see. But now they were looking. Now they were asking questions. Now they were beginning to realize that their assumptions about my life had been catastrophically wrong. The birthday party was 2 months away, but the education had already begun. They were discovering that their little Cassie playing dress-up had arranged a military flyover through connections they didn't know she had. They were learning that the daughter they dismissed was quoted in national newspapers and credited with military reforms. And this was just the beginning. When they met the colleagues who would be attending the party, when they saw the respect I commanded from people who actually understood military service, when they witnessed the ceremonial honors being rendered to both Grandfather William and to me, they would finally understand the magnitude of what they had spent 15 years dismissing. But more importantly, when they saw me in my proper context, not as their disappointing daughter who wouldn't settle down, but as Colonel Cassandra Mitchell, respected intelligence officer and military leader, they would finally see who I really was. The woman they never bothered to meet. 1 month before the birthday party, I decided it was time. My family had been frantically researching me like I was a stranger, calling Dylan with increasingly panicked questions, and generally spiraling as they realized they might have fundamentally misunderstood who I was. But research and speculation were different from undeniable proof. I drove to Millbrook on a Saturday morning, the 4 folders sitting in my passenger seat like evidence in a trial. Because that's what this was, really. A trial where 15 years of dismissal would finally meet 15 years of documentation. I hadn't called ahead. I wanted to see their faces when I presented them with the reality they spent so long ignoring.
Mom answered the door in her weekend clothes, flour on her apron from baking. For a moment, her face lit up with genuine happiness. "Cassie,
What a wonderful surprise! Come in, come in. I was just making your father's favorite cookies. The house looked exactly the same as it had when I was 18. Same furniture, same family photos on the mantelpiece, same sense that time had stopped the day I left for basic training. But what struck me was what wasn't there. No photos of me in uniform, no display of my military achievements, no acknowledgement that one of their children had spent 15 years serving their country. Dad emerged from his study, newspaper in hand. "Cassie, good to see you. How's the job going?" "The job," I repeated, setting the folders on their coffee table. "That's actually what I came to talk about." Mom bustled around, offering coffee and cookies, chattering about the upcoming birthday party. "Your brother has been so helpful coordinating things. We still don't understand how you arranged that flyover, sweetheart. Dylan says you have connections, but we had no idea you knew people who could make something like that happen." "Sit down, Mom, both of you." Something in my tone made them stop. Dad set down his newspaper. Mom perched on the edge of the sofa, still holding a dish towel. "I brought something to show you," I said, opening the first folder. "Since you've been researching me online, I thought you might want to see the primary sources." I handed them my deployment records. Dad's face went blank as he read the header. "Confidential. Operation Enduring Freedom. Forward Operating Base Balad." "What is this?" Mom asked, looking over his shoulder. "My service record from Iraq. 13 months coordinating intelligence operations in a combat zone. I was 24 years old, managing networks that tracked insurgent movements across 3 provinces." Dad read silently for several minutes. Mom kept glancing between the documents and my face, as if trying to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the officer described in the reports. "It says here you were responsible for preventing attacks on civilian targets," Dad said slowly. 17 separate incidents, according to the after-action reports. There's a letter in there from the commanding general crediting my analysis with saving approximately 200 lives. Mom's hand went to her throat. "Lives?" "Civilian lives. Iraqi families who were able to go home safely because we stopped the people trying to kill them." I opened the second folder. "These are my commendations. Awards for exceptional performance in combat zones, for developing new intelligence protocols, for leadership under fire." They stared at the Bronze Star citation. Mom read it out loud, her voice barely a whisper. "For exceptional heroism while engaged in action against an enemy of the United States in Syria. Colonel Mitchell's decisive leadership and tactical expertise under direct enemy fire resulted in the successful extraction of 12 civilians from hostile territory." "Enemy fire?" Dad repeated. "You were shot at?" "Multiple times, in multiple countries, over multiple deployments." I pulled out photographs from Syria, me with my team after the extraction, all of us covered in dust and exhaustion, but alive. This was taken 6 hours after we pulled those civilians out of a building that was under siege. 3 of them were children. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Mom was staring at a photo of me in full combat gear, holding an assault rifle, looking like anything but the little girl they remembered. "I don't understand," she said finally. "You never told us about any of this." "You never asked. And when I tried to tell you, you changed the subject to Trevor's insurance job or my cousin's wedding plans." I opened the third folder. "This is my security clearance documentation. Top secret, sensitive, compartmented information. Do you know what that means?" They shook their heads. "It means the President of the United States has personally authorized me to know secrets that could affect national security. It means I've been investigated more thoroughly than most federal judges. It means the government trusts me with information that could start or stop wars." Dad was turning pages with shaking hands. "These background investigations, they talk to our neighbors, our friends, everyone you've ever known, multiple times for every clearance upgrade." I leaned forward. "Dad,
While you were telling people at the hardware store that I was playing soldier, federal agents were interviewing those same people about my character, my integrity, my loyalty to my country. Mom started crying, quiet tears that she wiped away with the dish towel still clutched in her hands. We didn't know.
You didn't want to know. There's a difference. I opened the final folder. These are press clippings, articles where my work has been quoted or credited, academic papers I've written that are taught at military colleges, policy recommendations I've made that have been implemented at the highest levels of government. I handed Dad a copy of the Washington Post article. Read the byline. Intelligence reforms implemented based on recommendations by Colonel Cassandra Mitchell, described by Pentagon sources as one of the Air Force's most promising young officers and a critical asset to national security operations. Critical asset to national security operations, I repeated. While you were wondering when I'd get a real job, the Pentagon was describing me as critical to national security. Dad set down the newspaper and looked at me, really looked at me, for what felt like the first time in 15 years. Jesus, Cassie, we had no idea. You had every opportunity to have an idea. I tried to tell you about my deployments. I tried to explain what I was doing overseas. I tried to share my achievements with you. But every time I mentioned my work, you acted like it was a hobby I'd grow out of. Mom was reading the Bronze Star citation again, her tears falling onto the paper. It says you saved lives. Multiple times. That's what soldiers do, Mom. That's what I've been doing for 15 years, while you waited for me to come to my senses and become a teacher. But you look so young. In your uniform, you look like you're playing dress-up. I look young because I joined when I was young. I've grown up in this uniform. I've become an expert in my field while wearing it. I've earned the respect of generals and senators and foreign intelligence officials while you've been embarrassed that your daughter chose to serve her country. Dad was staring at a photo of me with the Secretary of Defense. You actually know him? Personally? He knows my work. He's implemented my recommendations. He's trusted me with assignments that have affected American foreign policy. I gathered the documents back into their folders. The man you see on TV making decisions about military operations, I'm one of the people who briefs him. The room fell silent except for Mom's quiet crying. They sat surrounded by evidence of a life they'd never acknowledged, achievements they'd never celebrated, a daughter they'd never really known. The flyover at Grandfather William's birthday. You didn't just know someone who could arrange that. I am someone who can arrange that. I'm a colonel in the United States Air Force with 15 years of distinguished service and connections throughout the Pentagon. When I make a request for military honors for a veteran's 80th birthday, people listen. Mom looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. What else don't we know about you? Everything. You don't know anything about who I really am because you decided 15 years ago that who I was becoming wasn't worth knowing. I stood up, leaving the folders on their coffee table. Grandfather William's party is in 4 weeks. You're going to meet some of my colleagues, people who actually understand what I do for a living. You're going to see me receive military honors alongside Grandfather William. You're going to watch F-16s fly over in recognition of our service. I headed toward the door, then turned back. And for the first time in 15 years, you're going to see your daughter as she really is. Not a disappointment who needs to settle down, but a decorated military officer who has devoted her life to serving something bigger than herself. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror, standing in their doorway holding the evidence of who their daughter had really become. The daughter they never bothered to meet. In 4 weeks,
They would meet her publicly, in front of the whole town, whether they were ready or not. They showed up at my Arlington apartment 3 days later. No warning, no phone call. Just the sound of knocking on my door at 7 in the evening when I was reviewing classified briefings for the next day's Joint Chiefs meeting. Through the peephole, I saw all three of them, Mom, Dad, and Uncle Garrett. They looked smaller somehow, standing in the hallway of my building where security badges and military contractors were normal sights. Dad clutched a manila envelope. Mom kept glancing around nervously. Uncle Garrett, the man who called my uniform dress-up, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. I opened the door slowly, still in my ACUs from the Pentagon. "This is unexpected." "Can we come in?" Mom asked, her voice strained. "We drove 4 hours to get here. We need to talk." I stepped aside, watching them take in my apartment. Military commendations on the walls, photos from deployments, my dress uniform hanging in its protective cover, books on counter-terrorism strategy stacked on every surface, the secure phone that only rang for classified communications sitting on my kitchen counter. This was my real world, and they were visitors in it.
"Nice place," Dad said awkwardly, staring at a framed photo of me with NATO intelligence officials. "Very military." Uncle Garrett had gone silent, studying my ribbon rack displayed in a shadow box. The Bronze Star, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Joint Service Commendation Medal. All the costume jewelry he'd mocked at the reunion. "What brings you to Arlington?" I asked, settling into my chair and not inviting them to sit. They remained standing in my living room like supplicants. Mom pulled out a folded newspaper clipping. "We found this in the Millbrook Gazette. They're doing a feature story about the flyover for your grandfather's birthday. They interviewed the base commander at Andrews Air Force Base." She read from the article. "Colonel Mitchell is one of our most distinguished intelligence officers. Her coordination of this tribute reflects the deep respect she commands within the military community. It's an honor to provide this recognition for both Colonel Mitchell and her grandfather's service." "Most distinguished," Dad repeated. "The base commander called you most distinguished?" "Colonel Brooks has worked with me on several joint operations. He's familiar with my record." Uncle Garrett finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "Cassie, the article says you've been deployed to combat zones 3 times. It says you've received awards for valor." "That's correct." "When I said, at the reunion, I didn't know." "You didn't know because you didn't ask. None of you ever asked." Mom pulled forward, tears already starting. "Sweetheart, we're here to apologize. We had no idea how important your work was. We thought—" "You thought what, exactly? You thought the United States Air Force promotes people to colonel as a participation trophy? You thought the Pentagon gives security clearances to people playing dress-up? We thought you were wasting your potential," Dad said quietly. "We thought you should be married, settled down, having children like other women your age." "Like other women." I stood up, moving to my bookshelf, where my NATO certification sat next to academic awards. "Dad, do you know what I did last Tuesday?" He shook his head. "I briefed 12 senators on Middle Eastern insurgency patterns. My analysis influenced a vote that approved $3 billion in military aid to allied nations. On Wednesday, I coordinated with British intelligence on a joint operation that prevented a terrorist attack in London. Yesterday, I was in a secure video conference with the CIA director discussing threats to American assets overseas." Uncle Garrett was staring at his hands. "Jesus Christ, Cassie. That's Colonel Mitchell when we're discussing my professional accomplishments." The correction was automatic, and it made all 3 of them flinch. Mom was crying openly now. "We're so sorry. We didn't understand." "You didn't want to understand. There's a difference. I moved to my desk, where classified briefing folders sat locked in a secure container. Every family gathering for 15 years, you made it clear that my choices were wrong. Every phone call, every visit, every holiday, you reminded me that I was disappointing you. We were worried about you, Dad said weakly. Worried about what? That I was serving my country with distinction? That I was saving lives? That I was earning the respect of military leaders and government officials? I pulled out my phone and showed them my recent call log. These are the people who call me: General Wells, my commanding officer, the Deputy Secretary of Defense, intelligence liaison officers from 5 different allied nations, the National Security Council staff. Uncle Garrett looked like he might be sick. When I said you were playing dress-up, you insulted a decorated combat veteran in front of 50 people. You mocked 15 years of distinguished military service. You turned my homecoming into a public humiliation. I was drunk, he said desperately. I didn't mean... You meant exactly what you said. You all did. Because drunk or sober, you fundamentally believe that my life choices are wrong. Dad opened the manila envelope he'd been clutching. We brought these to show you we're trying to understand. He spread printouts across my coffee table, articles about military intelligence, Wikipedia pages about Air Force ranks, a Department of Defense organizational chart where he'd highlighted my unit. You've been researching me, I observed. We've been trying to understand what you actually do, Mom said. We found articles where you're quoted, academic papers you've written. We had no idea you were so successful, accomplished, respected, important, Dad finished. We had no idea you were so important.
I looked at my parents and uncle, people who had shaped my childhood, who had raised me, who had sent me off to basic training 18 years ago with hugs and promises to support me. People who had then spent the next decade and a half treating my career like an embarrassing phase. I tried to tell you, I said quietly. Every time I came home, I tried to share what I was doing. You changed the subject. You asked when I was getting married. You suggested I consider teaching or nursing or any career more appropriate for women. We thought we were protecting you, Mom whispered. From what? From getting hurt, from being disappointed. Military life seems so uncertain. Uncertain, I almost laughed. Mom, I have job security most people can only dream of. I have skills that make me valuable to the most powerful organizations in the world. I have a career that matters, that makes a difference, that has literally saved lives. Uncle Garrett stood up abruptly. I need to say something. We all looked at him. At the reunion, when I said those things, he swallowed hard. I was jealous. My own kid dropped out of college, can't hold a job, lives in my basement playing video games, and there you were in that uniform, looking official and important, and I wanted to cut you down. You succeeded. No, I didn't. That's what kills me. I thought I was cutting down some kid playing soldier, but I was actually insulting a war hero. I was mocking someone who's done more for this country than everyone at that reunion combined. The room fell silent. My secure phone rang, a distinctive tone that meant classified communications. All 3 of them jumped at the sound. I need to take this, I said, answering with my standard protocol. Colonel Mitchell, secure line. It was a brief call about tomorrow's Joint Chiefs meeting, but I could see my family watching in fascination as I used terminology they didn't understand, referenced operations they'd never heard of, and spoke with the calm authority of someone who belonged in those conversations. When I hung up, Dad asked, "Was that about the birthday party?" "No, Dad, that was about national security. That's what most of my calls are about." I walked to my window, looking out at the Pentagon in the distance. Grandfather William's party is in 3 weeks.
You are going to see me in my professional context for the first time. You are going to meet my colleagues, watch military honors being rendered, and witness the respect I command in my actual world. I turned back to face them. I'm not doing this to humiliate you. I'm doing it to honor a veteran who deserves recognition. But yes, you are going to see who your daughter really is, and it might be uncomfortable for you. Mom wiped her eyes. We deserve uncomfortable. Yes, I said simply. You do. As they prepared to leave, Uncle Garrett stopped at my door. Cassie, Colonel Mitchell, is there any way you can forgive me? I don't know yet. Ask me after the party. After they left, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the evidence of who I really was. The same evidence I'd been surrounded by for 15 years, while my family saw only what they expected to see. In 3 weeks, expectations would finally meet reality. And reality was going to win. 2 weeks before the birthday party, my phone rang at 11:47 p.m. The caller ID showed Grandfather William, which was unusual enough that I answered immediately despite the late hour. Cassie, I hope I didn't wake you. No, Grandfather, I was still up. Is everything okay? There was a long pause, then the sound of him clearing his throat. I've been thinking about things. About what your parents told me after they visited you. About what I've read in the newspaper. About questions I should have asked years ago, but didn't. I set down the intelligence briefing I was reviewing and gave him my full attention. I need to tell you something, and I need to apologize for something, and I'm not sure which order to do them in. Whatever order feels right, Grandfather. I'll start with the apology. His voice was steady, but thick with emotion. I served in Korea for 2 years. I thought I understood military service. I thought I knew what it meant to wear the uniform. But when you came home from your deployments, when you tried to tell me about what you had experienced, I didn't listen the way I should have. I waited, sensing there was more. I let your parents treat your service like it was less important than what I did, like modern military service wasn't real service. And that was wrong, Cassie. That was profoundly wrong. Grandfather.
Let me finish, please. He took a shaky breath. I was in Korea during the war, but I was a supply clerk. I never saw combat. I never made life or death decisions. I processed paperwork and distributed equipment from a base camp 50 miles behind the front lines. And for 60 years, your family has treated me like a war hero. The revelation hung in the air between us. But you, Cassie, what you've done, what you've accomplished, I've been reading about your deployments, your awards, your work. You've actually done the things that I let people assume I did. You've been in combat. You've saved lives. You've made decisions that affected the outcome of military operations. I felt tears starting in my eyes. Your service mattered too, Grandfather. Every role in the military matters. Yes, but some roles matter more than others, and some people handle those roles better than others. And what kills me is that I have a granddaughter who has served with more distinction in 15 years than I did in 2. And instead of celebrating that, instead of learning from that, I let your parents diminish it. You didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked. When you came back from Iraq that first time, you tried to tell me about coordinating intelligence operations, about working with local informants, about the stress of making decisions that could get people killed. And do you know what I did? I didn't answer because I remembered. I told you that war was war, and that your generation didn't understand real sacrifice like mine did. I dismissed everything you tried to share with me because I was threatened by the idea that my granddaughter had already surpassed anything I'd done in uniform. The silence stretched between us. I could hear him crying quietly in my apartment at midnight. Grandfather, you don't need to...
Yes, I do. Because here's what I need to tell you. I've spent the last 2 weeks reading everything I could find about modern military intelligence. I've talked to some of my old Army buddies who have grandchildren in the service. I've researched what it takes to become a colonel, what top secret clearance means, what the Bronze Star is actually awarded for. He paused, gathering himself. Cassie, you're not just a successful soldier. You're one of the most accomplished intelligence officers in the Air Force. The articles I found, the people who know your work, they describe you as exceptional, as irreplaceable, as someone who has fundamentally changed how the military approaches intelligence operations. I was crying now, quietly in my apartment at midnight. And you let your parents call it dress up? I let Uncle Garrett mock you at the reunion? I sat there and said nothing while they humiliated someone who has served with more honor and distinction than anyone in our family ever has. You couldn't have known about the classified work. I could have known about the public recognitions. I could have asked about your deployments. I could have learned what your ribbons meant instead of assuming they were just participation trophies. His voice grew stronger. But more than that, I could have defended you, even if I didn't understand the details. I could have said, that's my granddaughter, and she's serving her country, and that deserves respect. I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my ACU top. Why are you telling me this now? Because in 2 weeks, at my birthday party, you're going to be honored alongside me. Military flyover, honor guard, the whole town watching. And I want you to know that when those planes fly over, when the honor guard presents arms, when the mayor talks about military service in our family, I'm going to be standing there knowing that you're the real hero, not me. Grandfather, let me ask you something, Cassie. When you were in Syria during whatever happened that earned you the Bronze Star, were you scared? I thought back to that day. The building under siege, the civilians trapped inside, the hostile fire, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between saving lives and losing them. Terrified, I admitted. But you did your job anyway. Yes, that's courage, sweetheart. Real courage. The kind I read about in books but never actually demonstrated. He was quiet for a moment. I was scared in Korea too. But I never had to act despite that fear. I never had to make the choices you've made. Every soldier serves according to their role and their circumstances. Stop protecting my feelings, Cassie. I'm 80 years old. I can handle the truth. The truth is that you have become the soldier I always wished I could have been. The truth is that you have brought more honor to our family name than anyone who came before you. And the truth is that instead of celebrating that, we've spent 15 years making you feel like you weren't enough. I was sobbing now, years of hurt and frustration finally finding release.
At my party, he continued, when they introduce us both, when they talk about the Henderson family's military tradition, I want you to know something. I'm not the patriarch of military service in this family anymore. You are. You're the standard now. You're the one who defines what it means to serve with honor. I don't need to be. Yes, you do. Because someone in this family needs to be recognized for what they've actually accomplished, not what people assume they accomplished. He paused. Your parents are going to see you get the recognition you deserve. Uncle Garrett is going to watch those planes fly over in your honor, and I'm going to be standing there proud as hell that you're my granddaughter. What if they're embarrassed? What if seeing me get military honors makes them uncomfortable? Then they'll learn something about what embarrassment feels like, something you've been teaching them for years without even trying. We talked for another hour. He asked detailed questions about my deployments, my awards, my work, questions he should have asked years ago but was asking now. Real questions from someone who finally understood that my answers mattered. When we finally hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling something I hadn't felt since I was 18 years old. Unconditional support from my family. Not from all of them,
Not yet, but from the one who mattered most. The veteran who understood what service really meant. Grandfather William had spent 60 years being treated as the military hero of our family, and at 80, he was ready to pass that recognition to the person who had actually earned it. In 2 weeks, he would stand beside me as equals, but we both knew that one of us had served with distinction, and it wasn't him. And for the first time in my adult life, someone in my family was proud of that fact instead of threatened by it. The real military hero in the Henderson family was finally going to be acknowledged, and my grandfather was going to make sure everyone knew it. The morning of Grandfather William's 80th birthday party, I received a phone call that changed everything I thought I understood about accountability. I was in my hotel room in Millbrook, pressing my dress blues and reviewing the ceremony timeline, when my phone rang. Mom's number. I almost didn't answer. We hadn't spoken since their visit to Arlington, but something made me pick up. Cassie. Her voice was raw, like she'd been crying for hours. I need to tell you something before today happens, before everyone sees what we should have seen years ago. I'm listening. Your father and we've been going to counseling since we visited your apartment, since we realized what we'd done to you. I set down my uniform jacket and sat on the hotel bed. Counseling? Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Family Center in Richmond. We drive down twice a week. She took a shaky breath. We told her about you, about your career, about how we'd been treating your service, and she said something that broke us both. I waited. She said that what we'd been doing wasn't just dismissive or unsupportive. She said that it was a form of emotional abuse, systematic invalidation, she called it. We'd been gaslighting our own daughter for 15 years, making you question whether your own accomplishments mattered. The words hit me like a physical blow. Emotional abuse, gaslighting, professional terms for what I'd experienced but never named. Cassie? Are you there? I'm here. Dr. Martinez asked us to do an exercise. She wanted us to imagine how we'd feel if someone treated our careers the way we'd treated yours. If someone called Dad's 30 years as an electrician playing with wires and asked when he was going to get a real job. If someone mocked my work as a school administrator and suggested I was wasting my potential. I could hear her crying again. And then she asked us to multiply that feeling by 15 years, to imagine living with that dismissal every single day from the people who were supposed to love and support us most. What did you realize? That we didn't just fail you as parents, we actively harmed you. We took someone who was achieving extraordinary things and made her feel like she was failing. We took someone who was saving lives and made her apologize for her choices. The hotel room felt very quiet. Outside, I could hear the sounds of Millbrook getting ready for what the local newspaper had dubbed the biggest military celebration in the town's history. There's more, Mom continued. Dr. Martinez asked us why we'd done it, why we'd been so invested in tearing down your achievements, and after weeks of sessions, we finally figured it out. Why?
Because your success made us feel like failures. Here's our daughter, serving with distinction, earning recognition from the highest levels of government, being quoted in national newspapers, and we couldn't even understand what she did for a living. It was easier to convince ourselves that what you were doing wasn't important than to admit that you'd become more accomplished than we ever imagined possible. I felt something loosening in my chest, anger I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten it was there. Your father's been having panic attacks since we visited your apartment. He keeps saying, "We broke our daughter. We broke the best thing that ever happened to our family, and we broke her." I'm not broken, Mom. No, you're not. That's what's so incredible. Despite everything we put you through, you succeeded anyway. You became exactly who you were meant to become, despite us, not because of us. She paused, gathering herself. Cassie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. When you organized this flyover,
When you arranged for military honors at your grandfather's party, was this about revenge? About humiliating us in front of the whole town? I thought about it carefully. At first, maybe, I wanted you to see who I really was. I wanted you to understand what you'd been dismissing. And now? Now it's about honoring Grandfather William. And maybe it's about finally introducing myself to my hometown as the person I actually am, instead of the person you convinced everyone I was. The person we convinced everyone you were, she repeated slowly. Oh God, Cassie, we poisoned the well, didn't we? We spent years telling relatives and neighbors and friends that you were going through a phase, that military service wasn't a real career, that you'd eventually settle down and do something appropriate for a woman. Yes, you did. So today, when they see the flyover, when they meet your colleagues, when they realize you're not playing dress up, but actually one of the most accomplished people this town has ever produced, they're going to realize that everything you told them about me was wrong. Mom was sobbing now. We stole 15 years of pride from you. 15 years of your family celebrating your achievements. 15 years of coming home to people who understood and appreciated what you'd accomplished. Yes. Can you ever forgive us? I looked out my hotel window at the Riverside Community Center where workers were setting up chairs and a podium for the ceremony. In 4 hours, 2 F-16s would fly over this small town in honor of military service. Honor guards would present arms. The mayor would speak about the Henderson family's contribution to American military tradition. And my parents would finally see their daughter as she really was. I don't know yet, I said honestly. But I want to try. What would that look like, trying? It would look like you learning who I actually am instead of who you want me to be. It would look like you asking about my work instead of when I'm getting married. It would look like you defending my choices when people question them instead of joining in the criticism. We can do that. We want to do that. And it would look like you understanding that I don't need your approval anymore. I needed it for 15 years, and you didn't give it. I had to learn to live without it. That doesn't just change because you've realized you were wrong. The line was quiet for a long moment. Mom finally said, Dr. Martinez said something else. She said that sometimes the best thing parents can do is get out of their adult children's way. Stop trying to shape them and start trying to know them. That's wise advice. Cassie, whatever happens today, whatever you decide about us, I want you to know something. We're going to be in that crowd watching you receive military honors, and we're going to be proud. Not proud that you're finally getting recognition despite our disapproval, but proud that we raised someone strong enough to succeed despite our failures. After she hung up, I sat in my hotel room thinking about accountability. Real accountability wasn't just admitting you were wrong. It was understanding the impact of being wrong. It was recognizing that damage had been done and couldn't be undone just because you'd finally seen the truth. My parents had spent 15 years systematically undermining my confidence in my own achievements. They'd made me question whether my career mattered, whether my choices were valid, whether I was enough. And now, on the day when I would finally be publicly recognized for who I really was, they wanted forgiveness. But forgiveness wasn't something I owed them. It was something I might choose to give them if they proved they understood the difference between apologizing for being wrong and committing to being better. Today would show me which one they were capable of.
In 3 hours, the town of Millbrook would meet Colonel Cassandra Mitchell. The question was whether my parents were ready to meet her too. At 1400 hours on August 15th, I walked into the Riverside Community Center wearing my dress blues with 15 years of ribbons catching the afternoon sunlight. The room fell silent. Not the uncomfortable silence I'd grown used to at family gatherings, but the reverent quiet that comes when people finally understand they're in the presence of something they'd never truly seen before. The community center had been transformed. Red, white, and blue bunting draped the walls. A small stage held 2 chairs of honor, one for Grandfather William, one for me. American flags flanked the podium where Mayor Catherine Walsh would speak about military service and sacrifice. But what stopped me in my tracks was the crowd. Nearly 300 people had come, not just family, but half of Millbrook. Town officials, local veterans, high school students, families I'd grown up with but hadn't seen in years. And standing near the front, looking nervous but determined, were Lieutenant Colonel James Park, Major Rebecca Torres, Captain Michael Chen, and Colonel David Hayes in their dress uniforms. My colleagues had come. My real family was here. Colonel Mitchell, Mayor Walsh approached me with genuine respect. Thank you for arranging this celebration. What you've coordinated for your grandfather's birthday has brought our entire community together. It's an honor to recognize his service, ma'am. And yours. I've been reading about your career, Colonel. Millbrook has never produced a military officer of your caliber. We should have been celebrating you years ago. I saw Uncle Garrett standing near the back, wearing an ill-fitting suit and looking like he wanted to disappear. Our eyes met across the room. He nodded once, not casual acknowledgement, but something that looked like respect. Cassie! Grandfather William approached me in his Korean War veteran's cap, moving slowly but with dignity. You look magnificent, sweetheart. So do you, Grandfather. He took my arm and led me toward our chairs. Are you ready for this? I think so. Are you? He smiled. I've been ready to pass the torch for 20 years. I just never knew who deserved to carry it. At 14:30 hours, the ceremony began. Mayor Walsh spoke about the Henderson family's military tradition, but her words were different from what I'd expected. Instead of the generic praise for service I'd heard at countless similar events, she spoke specifically about sacrifice, about courage under fire, about the weight of life and death decisions. She'd done her homework. She understood what real military service looked like. Today we honor 2 generations of service, she said, looking directly at me. Corporal William Henderson, who served his country in Korea with dedication and honor, and his granddaughter, Colonel Cassandra Mitchell, who has served 3 tours in combat zones and has been recognized by the Pentagon as one of our military's most distinguished intelligence officers. The crowd erupted in applause, real applause, not polite clapping. I saw my parents in the 3rd row, tears streaming down their faces as they finally heard their daughter described accurately in public. Then came the moment I'd been planning for months. The sound of jet engines approaching from the southeast. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Walsh announced, please step outside for the ceremonial flyover. The crowd filed out to the community center's parking lot. I stood between Grandfather William and Lieutenant Colonel Park, watching the sky. My colleagues flanked us in formation, a show of military solidarity that made several people in the crowd whisper in amazement. At exactly 1500 hours, 2 F-16 Fighting Falcons from Andrews Air Force Base roared overhead in perfect formation, their afterburners painting silver streaks across the August sky. The crowd cheered and applauded, but I felt something deeper than celebration. I felt acknowledged. After 15 years of my family treating my service as a phase, the United States Air Force had just honored me in front of my entire hometown. Colonel Mitchell, a voice said behind me. I turned to see a young woman with a press badge. I'm Jennifer Barnes from the Millbrook Gazette. Could I ask you a few questions about your military career? Of course. Our readers are fascinated by your story. You grew up here in Millbrook, but many people didn't realize you'd become such a distinguished officer. Can you tell us about your path to military leadership? As I answered her questions about my deployments, my work in intelligence, my security clearance, and my Bronze Star, I noticed more and more people gathering to listen. Neighbors who'd known me since childhood, former classmates,
family friends who'd been hearing about my phase for 15 years. They were finally meeting Colonel Cassandra Mitchell.
Colonel, another reporter asked, what would you say to young people from small towns who are considering military service? I'd say that service isn't about where you come from, it's about what you're willing to give. The military doesn't care if you're from Millbrook or Manhattan. It cares whether you'll show up when people's lives depend on you. After the interviews, I found myself surrounded by veterans from the local VFW post, men and women who'd served in Vietnam, the Gulf War, Iraq, Afghanistan. They understood what my ribbons meant, what my rank represented, what my deployments had required. Colonel, said Frank Rodriguez, a Vietnam veteran I'd known since childhood, I owe you an apology. I've been hearing about your military career secondhand for years, and I never understood what you were really doing over there. What did you think I was doing? Honestly, I thought you were some kind of clerk or administrator. Your folks always made it sound like you had a desk job. He shook his head. But 3 combat deployments? Bronze Star for Valor? Intelligence work that gets quoted in the Washington Post? Hell, Colonel, you've seen more action than most of us ever did. As the afternoon progressed, I watched my family's dynamic shift in real time. Relatives who'd been making jokes about my career for years were now asking serious questions about military intelligence. Cousins who'd pitied my single status were now introducing me to their friends as the war hero. Uncle Garrett finally approached me near the end of the reception. He looked older than I remembered, smaller somehow. Cassie, I need to say something publicly. Uncle Garrett. No, let me do this. He turned to address the crowd around us. Folks, I need to make an announcement. The conversations quieted. At our family reunion a few months ago, I made some comments about my niece's military service. I called her uniform a costume. I suggested she wasn't living in the real world. His voice was steady but pained. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. He looked at me directly. Colonel Mitchell has served our country with more distinction than anyone in our family ever has. She's saved lives, prevented attacks, and earned recognition from the highest levels of our government. And instead of celebrating that, I mocked it. The crowd was silent now. I'm not asking for forgiveness, because what I did was unforgivable. I'm just asking that everyone here understand that when you dismiss someone's service, when you minimize their sacrifice, you're not just hurting them, you're dishonoring everyone who's ever worn the uniform. He extended his hand to me. Colonel Mitchell, thank you for your service, and thank you for being a better person than your uncle deserved. I shook his hand, and something that had been tight in my chest for months finally loosened. As the sun set over Millbrook, I stood with Grandfather William watching the cleanup crew fold chairs and take down bunting. The crowd had dispersed, but several of my colleagues remained, talking with local veterans and sharing stories. How do you feel? Grandfather William asked. Different, I said. For the first time in 15 years, I feel like my hometown knows who I really am. And your parents? I looked across the parking lot where Mom and Dad were talking quietly with Lieutenant Colonel Park, asking detailed questions about my work and listening to his answers with what looked like genuine interest. I think they're trying to learn. Whether they succeed, we'll see. What happens now? Now I go back to Arlington, back to my real life, but I think I'll come home more often. It's easier to visit a place where people understand who you are. As my colleagues and I prepared to leave, I felt something I'd never felt in Millbrook: belonging. Not because I'd changed, but because everyone else finally understood who I'd always been. The girl who'd left for basic training 18 years ago had been searching for her family's approval. The woman driving back to Arlington tonight didn't need it anymore. She had something better: their respect. And for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough. 3 months later, I received my promotion to Brigadier General. This time, my parents didn't ask when I was getting married. They asked when they could attend the ceremony. Progress.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.